So tell me about Carol Burnett and Paul Winchell's show.
Uh, while we were doing the Winchell shows, one of the writers or Paul, somebody figured out that Jerry, the dummy, Jerry Mahoney, should have a girlfriend. And they auditioned several girls and picked Carol Burnett. She was about 14 then, and she was just wonderful. And she's got that great kind of a memory, a mind. Whenever I see her, she remembers that date in the 50s that she started the Winchell show. And that's such a kick to me, that somebody should remember that.
Was that as funny as it sounds, that Carol Burnett, as a teenager, was the girlfriend of a dummy named Jerry Mahoney?
Sure. It was funny, and she was great.
In '51, you did the Doodles Weaver show. Tell me about that.
Doodles was Pat's brother. And Doodles was with the Spike Jones Orchestra. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Am I going back too far? That was a breakup kind of a band. And Doodles did some funny songs and funny recitations with Spike. And Pat decided that he'd give him 13 weeks on the air. And it wasn't a big hit, unfortunately. But Doodles had that kind of quirk that you had to love, or at least I did. I remember we invited him to dinner, and I said, Doodles, don't come wearing the funny clothes. And he came up driving a Model T wearing a tuxedo. And it was just me and Annie and Doodles for dinner, He thought funny also.
I'm going to ask you about some shows you were involved with, and why don't you give me just sort of a brief impression or anything that comes to mind?
Okay.
Colgate Comedy Hour.
Colgate Comedy Hour, they had 4 hosts who were on once a month. Jimmy Durante, Martin and Lewis, Olson and Johnson. We had a 4th. Help me, do you know?
That was a Milton Berle show, was it?
No.
That was different.
No. I can't think who was 4th, but Jerry ended up doing one of those, Jerry Lester, because he won. Oh, Jack Benny.
Oh, Jack Benny. Okay.
Yeah. And I did Olson and Johnson and Jimmy Durante. So I had 2 of those monthly shows in addition to whatever else I was doing.
And this was you were leading the band for these?
Yep.
Okay.
Not on camera with those. This was just a big, good-sized band.
Dagmar's Canteen.
That came right after Jerry decided not to do Broadway Open House anymore. And this is a desperation attempt to keep something going that was like it. So Dagmar had her own show that was on once a week, Dagmar's Canteen, and in the hopes that she was going to be another Texas Guinan. It didn't work out quite.
Did she have trouble as a host?
Not really, but nobody cared. You see, when she was playing off of Jerry Lester or me on Broadway Open House, it was a different story because she didn't have to be a big star then. But here she was the hostess of her own show, and somehow it just didn't come off. Maybe people didn't want to see a woman hostess. I'm not sure. But it just didn't happen.
The Bill Cullen Show.
Bill Cullen Show was a strip show, 5 a week. I used to do Maury's show. We were on the air at 9 o'clock in the morning. If you can imagine rehearsing at 6 in the morning, for a show that's going on at 9, then at 10 o'clock, as many of us as could fit in by car ran downstairs, got in the car, and we went to the second studio and did the Bill Cullen show, which was also a strip show, a 5-a-week show. It's like I'm telling you, you had to have a band with a live show. And Bill, I don't know if we were on ABC or CBS, but that wasn't NBC. Maury was NBC, then we ran over to do Bill Cullen. And I forget.
How was that? How was it working with Bill Cullen?
Just fine. A gentleman. Nice man, really a gentleman.
Where was the band, or where were you located on the set?
Off camera. Same as we were off camera with Maury, off camera with Jerry. You had to, swing a camera around to shoot us. It wasn't like Carson, where you saw the band a lot of the time. This was only, 6 guys, I guess, a motley crew. Is that what you would say? But we were pretty motley. And we weren't in many shots.
Tell me about a show called, that Fred Allen hosted, called Judge for Yourself.
That was a Goodson Todman show, and it was a kind of a game show. And let me tell you something wonderful about Fred. I had a big band on that show, and Fred used to do a lot of his own writing. He was a terrific brain, terrific mind. His great line, which was, I'll remember forever, was, the only way to get on the other side of Fifth Avenue was to be born there. Now that's funny, At any rate, get back to his shows. He used to write a separate show for dress rehearsal because he didn't want the band to hear the jokes when we were on the air, because the band was maybe his best audience. They just loved him. I loved him. He got a lot of laughs from us, but dress rehearsal was a completely different show, different jokes, different everything. And he was great mind.
And you mentioned this show, Treasure Hunt. What was it like with working with Jan Murray?
That was also just, that was a strip show also. We were on 5 days a week. We were on, I forget, 1 night or 2 nights a week, but we were on 5 days. Nighttime, I made the band bigger, and I remember I wanted 2 French horns. And Jan came over and said, why do we need 2 French horns? And I said, it'll class up the show, Jan, at night. And that was a magic word. I didn't realize what it meant to him, but he really wanted to be classy, and that kind of sold him. It'll class up the show. Fine, you got 2 French horns.
How did Treasure Hunt get caught up in the quiz show scandal?
Okay, you could decide whether to keep this or leave it or what you're going to do. The fellows who did the warm-up for Jan's show also got cards from the audience long before the show started. And the writers would figure out what looked good to them, who would be somebody that had something interesting to say that Jan could talk to. Now the audience didn't realize that these 2 guys had nothing to do with picking the contestants. The writers picked them. However, they made deals with a lot of the people in the audience. If we get you on the show, we divvy the prizes. And one of them went so far as to write a letter, which is, you can't get much dumber than this. We got you on the show and you didn't split. So the guy called Jan and NBC and said, if this show is on tomorrow, I'm going to the Times with this letter. And needless to say, it wasn't on tomorrow. that was the bad part of the quiz show scandal.
Right. In the late '50s, you did. You worked on "I've Got a Secret." What was your role on that show?
Just having a large orchestra.
And what was Gary Moore like?
Wonderful host, really. I'm sure you could tell if you've ever seen some of those shows. He was a nice man. I keep telling you the same thing all the time. I got to work with nice people.
Tell us about Beat the Clock with Bud Collier.
That was a game show, not unlike a show called $1 a Second. And I did them both. And you actually had to play tick-tock music, for 1 minute or 30 seconds or however long the contestants had to perform whatever trick it was, whether it was bobbing for apples or, one of those kind of shows.
Now, you wrote a closing theme for that show, is that right?
Yep.
How did that come about?
Well, whatever shows I did, it was kind of up to the music director on most shows to write a closing theme. I had the closing theme on Johnny's show. The only thing I didn't have the closing theme on was Almost Like Being in Love, Broadway Open House, because Jerry wanted to sing that song. But every other show, I did have a closing theme. When I say I had it, I published and wrote it.
And Beat the Clock was on for quite a number of years.
Yes, it was.
Were you there for the whole time, or?
No. I forget who started that. I don't know. I was on for the whole time of $1 a Second, and for the whole time of Jan's. He had a second show besides Treasure Hunt.
Were you typically juggling multiple shows?
Yes.
At any given time in your career at this point?
All the time. Because I didn't have enough senses. And like I told you, I was very hammy. I wanted to do every show that came, around the bend. I'm thinking of something right now that I want to tell you about Abe Burrows. He made fun of songs. Do you know the song Show Business? No business like show business. You must,
Ethel
right?
Merman, sure.
Okay. His big joke with that song was, no people like show people. They smile and they hello. Yesterday they told you would not go far. Last night you opened and they were right. Now that's a funny joke.
Right.
He also, something else stuck to me that he used to sing. Do you know how you're going to keep them down on the farm? You remember that old joke, old song?
Yeah.
And Abe always sang, how you going to keep them down on the farm after they've seen the farm? Which is a funny idea. Abe thought funny. And I'm glad I thought of those two. He was responsible for a lot of wonderful, funny jokes and a lot of funny, wonderful Broadway shows. And Jimmy is remarkable now.
Getting back to the game shows, you did a real classic, What's My Line?
Yep.
And wrote a song called Roller Coaster?
Roller Coaster. And that, they were just looking for a theme. Bill Todman and Mark Goodson were looking for a theme, and I happened to have this, and it was almost a hit, mezzo hit record by Henry Renee. And I played it for him, and Mark said, that's it, that's the theme.
Did you write with a partner typically, or just yourself?
Most everything was, wait a minute, there was a piano player by the name of Louis Bush, and I wrote it with him. We had decided that what the world needed was a bigger and better Dizzy Fingers, which was a song. If you had a keyboard, I could play it for you. And the bigger and better Dizzy Fingers turned out to be Roller Coaster. And we were extremely lucky with that because we got Henry Renee, and even luckier because Mark and Bill liked it as the theme. That was 20 years of What's My Line. So the performances were just terrific.
How long were you on that show?
Well, I never did the show. It was just my music. And for 20 years, my music was the music on the show.
On What's My Line. You did a lot of Mark Goodsman, Bill Todman shows.
Yes.
Did that come because of a relationship with these two producers, or not so much?
No, I didn't know them before. I didn't know them at all before the Herb Schreiner show, before Two for the Money. And after that, we became pretty good friends. There was a producer who did most of Goodson Todman's work, Gil Fates. And we became friendly. There was no reason, you see, Steve, if you're working with or for a fella and the show is a hit, there's no reason for them, if they get another show, not to use you, you know? And so, with a little luck, that pyramids.
What were Goodson and Todman like as a producing team?
Well, most of the new ideas came from Mark. When they started out, they did something called Battle of the Battle of the Boroughs. They had people on from Manhattan, people on from Brooklyn, and it was, I can't remember exactly how the show went, but fortunately I think that Bill Todman came from a family that could support such a show, and he and Bill and Mark worked very well together.
In the early 60s, you put out some recordings of pop television themes, I believe.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
Well, you see, because a lot of guys can write as well, better, you know. It's just that I had gotten started doing themes of a couple of daytime strip shows, and if you had a daytime strip and you needed a theme, generally you came to me. And I went into a studio and recorded a few things with just a trio. Do you like this better than this or what? And you made up your mind, you know, which theme you liked. And then when I went back into the studio with as large an orchestra, let's say from 10 to 15 or 20 men, whatever the tariff would allow.
When you recorded these themes, did you change the arrangement up a lot, or
No.
did you kind of keep it?
No, I kept it pretty much the same. I'm trying to think. Some of them were compilations of records that were already done, and some I had to redo. And it was generally because the record label figured, at that time, every label needed, a community sing album as part of their stock.
Like Mitch Miller or something? Or?
Oh, Mitch Miller had the best one of all, you know. Sing Along with Mitch was number one. But all record companies have a sing-along kind of album, By the Light of the Silvery Moon, those kind of songs in them. And because I had done one or two, I ended up doing a lot. Actually, somebody from a record label would come and say, this is the kind of an album we need. And in the 50s and 60s, I had enough songs that were in the top 10 so that you weren't going to somebody who didn't know the music business, you know.
So you recorded on various labels, not just...
Yes. At one time, want to talk about lucky again, okay? I was with Columbia, King Records, RCA, and Choral. How about that for lucky?
Yeah.
You know, and it, how else can you put that down? Lucky.
And was the artist listed as Milton Delugg and his orchestra?
Or else Frankie Lane with Milton Delugg and his orchestra. Always, I got billing, you know, and that was good too. And I appreciated it too.
Were TV themes pretty much a real part of the popular culture?
Sure.
From the beginning almost?
Sure, absolutely. Without a question.
Now, in 1964, you wrote a song for a low-budget film. The film was called Santa Claus Conquers the Martians.
God. That's listed. That's one of the 10 worst films ever made. And I did the music for it.
Tell us about the song, Hooray for Santa
Hooray
Claus.
for Santa Claus. Now, Pat Sajak always, when he sees me, sings the first 8 bars, which was SANTACLAUS, hooray for Santa Claus. He says, what is that Santy? It's spelt with an A, you know. But the writer insisted on saying Santa Claus, and it's tough to write with, or to argue with a fella who's writing the lyrics, because there are a few ways, not many, that you can say I love you without, you know, come rain or come shine, or however you want to say. But I always figured the tough part was the lyric writer. If somebody came with a decent lyric, it was fairly simple, at least I found it that way, to write a melody for it, you know?
Right. When audio tape came into its own in the 60s,
Yeah.
how did that affect your job? Did that help you, the technology, or was it a problem? Or how did that transition where things could be recorded or pre-recorded?
Well, because of the Dick Clark law, everything was pre-recorded. It really was. There were very few shows live. I happen to be doing one now. Macy's Thanksgiving Day show, that's live. And Brad Lockman is the executive producer and wouldn't have it any other way. It's a live show. Johnny's show was a live show. All the nighttime shows are live, so you don't need pre-recorded music on them. I use a lot of pre-recorded music on Macy's because that way I can record the Rockettes' number and give them the tape, and they can rehearse to it.
What about the numbers or the excerpts from musicals? It seems that the vocals, at least, are pre-recorded.
They are.
How is that done musically in terms of the final presentation?
Well, Brad or Bill Skimmerhorn or all of us decide what show we're going to do, what 4 shows we're going to do, and then I have a meeting generally with the choreographer, the music director, and we try to figure. Brad tells me how much time we have for each. Brad or Bill Bracken, who was the producer, you got 8 minutes. We need to get 8 minutes out of whatever show we're going to do. Then it just requires sitting down and figuring out where we're going to make the cuts, what we're going to do, and we pre-record. And the day after pre-recording, they bring in the singers, and they overdub. Then we have to make a tape, or now you're making a DVD. Tape doesn't exist anymore, or a CD, and they can take it back and rehearse to it. So it pays to have those pre-recorded. It eliminates a lot of mistakes that could be made, you know, and you can make $1 million on a live show. mistakes are by the barrel. They really are, because, for example, on Macy's, there are a lot of floats that come down. Now they turn a corner. One float could get too close to a corner and crack up. So Brad or Bill, somebody's got to say to me, we're dumping whatever that float is coming down. Get the music for whatever's following it. That part of it is sure live and is a kind of hassle to, keep in step.
Now, for Macy's Parade, it looks like the main staging area is at Herald Square.
Right in front of Macy's.
Where are you physically?
In a shack. There's a shack for the producer. There's a shack for the director. There's a shack for me and the audio engineer and a sound effects man. And there's a shack for wardrobe. And there's also a shack for getting a cup of coffee. And I'm in one of those shacks.
So you're not with live musicians at all?
No.
It's all been...
Once the show starts, the show is live. But once it starts, it's a matter of me talking to the audio engineer, that's Jolie, and we can talk to each other and know what's coming up, and I can also hear in the booth what cracked up that's out of line that we can't do. Also, a great advantage, not only do I have an on-the-air monitor, I've got a monitor of what's coming up, so we can also see that something is out of whack, not in place. And Joel and I, as Joel Spector, has got to give billing, who's a very big help to me too. Gary shoots, let's say, some clowns on the street that we didn't intend to shoot. We need to pull up some clown music in a hurry, but we're able to do it. So I keep saying, so far they haven't caught up to us yet.
The Tonight Show. Johnny Carson started The Tonight Show in 1962.
Yep.
And then and Skitch Henderson was the band leader.
He sure was.
And in 1966, you came on. As you mentioned earlier, you came on to The Tonight Show. What were the circumstances that you joined The Tonight Show?
A phone call from Art Stark, who said, can you start The Tonight Show tonight? And like I said, I never said no. I didn't have enough sense to say, yep. And he said, show up at 4 o'clock or whatever it was, wear a suit, And I showed up and did the show. You want to turn that off for a second, please?
So you came to The Tonight Show.
Right.
You replaced Skitch Henderson on
Exactly.
very, very short notice, extremely short notice.
One day, right.
So what was it like working with Johnny Carson? Just being kind of thrown in there and then...
I must tell you, Johnny was not super friendly. I don't know. Congenial, yes. Super friendly, no. So he wanted everything to be ad-libbed on his show. So you didn't talk to Johnny before the show went on. The only person who talked to Johnny was Art Stark. And Art made it clear to me, you don't go near Johnny's dressing room. On the air, you'll talk to Johnny.
And how did the repartee go? From where were you physically at that point in the band?
I was a conductor.
And was this still in New York?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we came out here a couple of times too, before the show came out on a regular basis. When it came out here, when it originated from here, Doc, who was the trumpet player in the band, was the leader then, and I was with Chuck Barris, a dear man and a dear friend, and a big talent.
When you came to The Tonight Show to lead the band, did you inherit the same band pretty much?
Sure, exactly. They were all on staff, and they were the best musicians in town. I'm not fooling you. Just great musicians. Wonderful.
Did Johnny have favorite songs or a favorite style of music he liked?
He liked, you know what, I talked about Count Basie before? He loved Count Basie. He loved that roaring big band sound. And he used to have a set of drums in his dressing room, and the whatever rehearsals we had were piped into his room so he could play drums along with the band.
During the show itself?
No, during rehearsals.
No, I understood. I was going to ask you, during the show, did he go back and, was there a kind of a dialogue with the band sometimes or with you?
Once in a while, yeah. Once in a while. At the beginning of the show, always was talk with Ed and talk with me. Not much during the rest of the hour or hour and a half. It's just if I happen to know something about one of the acts that he had on, or I had made records with Haley Mills or whoever, we would talk about that. But it was never rehearsed.
What about Ed McMahon? What was he like to work with?
Very friendly, very congenial, very on top of everything. And he was a big help to me when I first started, because he said to me, Milton, lean on me, you know. Don't worry about anything. Lean on me if there's anything you know that seems a little shaky.
How did he help you, with advice or?
Not really. He would just take over a dialogue. He would, you know, he was a good talker. He talked to John. And most of the time he was sitting on the little love seat next to John, too. He was really a very good second banana for John.
Was the band about the same size as it is today?
No. Today it's a much smaller band. At that time it was a big roaring band. Now it's a small band that Jay has.
What was your typical preparation for a Johnny Carson Tonight Show broadcast?
Rehearsals were late afternoon, and whoever was going to be the singer on the show, Al Martino, Petula Clark, somebody, always came to rehearsals, and we did all of their music, and nothing was pre-recorded on Johnny's show. Everything was live. Once in a great while, somebody would come with a 4-minute arrangement that they were doing in a nightclub, and we'd have to cut it down to 2 minutes for air for Johnny's show. And sometimes the performer would forget that there was a cut. And of course, that was World War III, you know, that kind of a train wreck. Very seldom happened, but it did happen a couple of times.
Did you ever help to select musical guests or suggest musical guests?
Yes. I'll tell you, as little as possible, because you don't want to be, you know, he's the guy who said we should use her. And I didn't want to be that guy.
Now, when you were there, was the musical theme, was that this theme that was still used up till the end with Johnny, basically?
Yes.
The Paul Anka.
Paul Anka and Johnny. Their names are on that da-da-da-da-da. It was just called a Tonight Show theme, you know. I don't think it had another name.
How did musical cues work during the show? Did you cue station breaks or cue certain, like, comedy sketches?
I had a list of who was on the show. And if the weatherman was going to be on or something, I played da-da-da, stormy weather, or, you know, whatever I thought was humorous, and many times I could get to Johnny with some of that.
Was who was the drummer at that time?
Bobby Rosengarten had two drummers.
Mm-hmm.
Bobby Rosengarten and
Is it Ed Shaughnessy, or is he?
Ed Shaughnessy. They split it up.
And did you record an album with the band during
Sure.
that time?
Sure. I don't know what that album was called, The Tonight Show Orchestra or something.
How did that do, or how did that come about?
Well, it was pretty easy. I had a manager at that time who was able to get that for. I didn't have to do anything to get that album, and that was before CDs. It was an album, and then I recorded also for RCA sambas and bossa novas. I played the accordion on an album. None of them broke any records.
Did you do any outside gigs with the Tonight Show Orchestra when the show was down for any reason, or on a hiatus?
No, I didn't. Skitch did an awful lot. I was a co-host. Mike Douglas. Is Mike still with us?
I don't think so. No.
But that was from Philadelphia. Used to get on a train to go do the Mike Douglas show, be a co-host, bring your accordion, and as soon as it was over, get back to New York on Tonight Show.
Now, you had quite a history of performing, in sketches on camera on many of the shows that you were on. Did you do that on the Tonight Show at all?
Yes.
Like the Mighty Carson Art Players, were you sometimes?
Yep. Johnny would write, or some of the writers and Johnny would do something, and I was usually included. And that was the only thing that was ever rehearsed.
And how long did that last at the Tonight Show? Was that a year or two?
I was there about a year and a half, but the Tonight, Johnny, wasn't he 25 or 30 years?
I think 30, to 92.
Yeah.
So who came after you to lead the band?
My trumpet player,
Doc.
And I went to do, what did we do first with Chuck? You remember the hit parade, the old hit parade? I don't think anybody's that old. You wouldn't remember. Nobody in the room is. But we did a show called The Hit Parade. That was the first thing I ever did with Chuck. I used to send him tapes to play newlywed game themes, dating game themes, mother-in-law, whatever shows Chuck was doing. And then I got a call from him one day, and he said, I want to do an amateur show, but I need a live band. So Annie and I packed up, came out for 8 weeks, and that was the Gong Show. And it was really a big hit. And so we sold the house in New York, bought the house in California, and I was with Chuck.
So when you went from Chuck Barris came pretty much right after the Tonight Show?
Yes. Yes. Also, at the same time, Chuck was very good about it. I tell you, he used to let me off because I had the house specials at NBC. There was an Orange Bowl parade, the halftime show for the Orange Bowl, Macy's parade, Rose parade. I was the king of parades for about 5 minutes. There was a show called College Queen. NBC had a lot of house staff shows that they produced. And fortunately, I did all of those. And like I say, Chuck used to let me off to do them. And I would go running back to get straight with Gong.
When you left the Tonight Show, was that a routine did you enjoy that routine, or what were the circumstances of why you left?
Well, see, Johnny was the only host of any show I ever did who wasn't close to anybody else on the show except the producer. So it wasn't so bad for me because Chuck, I keep saying, was a dear man, a great brain, and a dear friend. And that was a pleasure because whatever he had, I did, you know.
So was that another example of lucky, just being able to meet Chuck
Oh
Barris?
boy. Oh yeah.
And how did that happen? You were in New York, and
Yeah,
Chuck Barris
in
was
the
on the West
50s.
Coast?
In the
Okay.
50s. And you had to make a demo of whatever song you wrote, whether it was your song or if you were doing a favor. And mostly I did all of Chuck's demos. And we always got a singer or two or through whatever we needed. And I would get 5 or 6 men to make a demo so that Chuck could play the demo for record companies and try to get a commercial record. And indeed, he had one big hit. It's called Palisades Park.
Freddie Cannon.
Exactly. How the hell do you know that?
I have that record.
Oh,
I
yeah?
bought it. Yeah.
Well, you know, now, how about writing bum, 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 bum. Last night I took a walk in the park. Bum,
Great
bum,
song.
bum, bum, dot. But big hit.
So Chuck Barris was a music man before he was a TV producer?
Oh, yeah. And he also, I think at one time, sold something called QTV.
Mm-hmm.
That was a scroll on the top of the television camera, so that if we had one right now, that would be running around telling me what to say. And that, I think that's how Chuck started in New York, and then he started writing songs. And then he became the assistant head of daytime at ABC and became very dear friends with Dick Clark. And then he had some shows that he wanted to do himself, and fortunately, that's where I came in.
So when you had met him earlier, and then did he request you basically at some point
Yeah.
later when he was?
Yes.
Now the Newlywed Game and the Dating Game came before the Gong,
Gong Show, yes.
Were you involved with those shows?
I used to send tapes. Tapes for You've Won a Trip to Acapulco, wherever it was. If he needed a Latin kind of music, that's what I sent him. And he had all kinds of tapes that he used on those shows for prizes and for opening and closing themes. And they were long before the Gong Show.
And were you in studio during that show, or did you send him the music that he needed pre-recorded?
Gong?
Yes. No, I'm talking about Newlywed Game.
Oh, all I had to do was send tapes.
And Dating Game, the same thing.
Yep, all tapes.
So you didn't have an opportunity to be on camera on those shows.
Right.
Okay.
And they sure didn't need me, you know. Chuck picked good hosts, and that's all they needed. The shows carried themselves, you know.
Now, what about the themes for those shows? I mean, everyone knows it. Da, 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 those
Yeah,
things.
but Chuck changed that finally
Okay.
to, oh Lord, I'm trying to think. The titles I don't remember, but that was a Herb Alpert record that started.
Right. Okay.
And then Chuck changed it after a few years and wrote something that he liked better, and I recorded that in.
There's a song called "Summertime Guy" for the Newlywed Game.
Yes. Yeah, and I was trying to think of the theme of the Dating Game, and I can't. I know we started the Newlywed Game with bum 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 bum. Golly. Can you sing? Do you know how that theme goes? No. I got
I think
no
the
help.
one I did, I think, was the Dating Game. But
No, okay. Yeah, that was that Herb Alpert
Right.
record.
Okay, you're right. Was Chuck trying to get a certain tone for those shows in a theme?
Well, he wanted both of those themes to be that style, that two trumpet style, which was really big at that time. You know, you couldn't have a bigger hit than any of those Herb Alpert things. And that was the style that he wanted as themes. When we got to the Gong Show, he wanted a different kind of a theme because that was another era. He wanted something that was kind of Dixieland. So the two of us wrote something.
Now these shows ran a long time, and a lot of the shows that you did ran a long time.
Oh, yeah.
How were you compensated? Did you get residuals of any of the arrangements or things you did?
I'll tell you what you get. ASCAP, which is a performing society, has to keep track. It's a non-profit organization, and everybody has to turn in songs that they're playing to be cleared. And let's say, for example, do you know how ASCAP works? I don't want to be telling you
a little
something.
bit, but you're the expert, so you tell me.
Well, not such an expert, but I will tell you. Let's say, make up a number, $1,000. Now, at the end of a 6-month period, they figured out Stardust was played 800 times, Moonglow was played whatever, and the dating game theme was played, or the Gong Show theme was played, and it's all divided. You get a piece of that pie, depending upon how many times your songs get played, as against Wind Beneath My Wings, or whatever else is being played.
Okay. Okay. In the mid-'70s, the new Treasure Hunt was revived by Chuck Barris.
Exactly.
How did that compare with the original 50s version of Memory?
It didn't have the opening. It didn't have the choosing of the... You see, you had two contestants vying for honors. Who was going to be on to be competition with the fellow that was a holdover from yesterday. On Chuck's show, it was just 4 people who picked a booby prize or you're on the show out of a purse. That's really the way it was, the short straw, long straw business. That was the way it was decided of, and it was on the air, of who was going to be on the show. It didn't have that anything competitive in it. So the only thing that was like it was, at the end of the show, which treasure chest would you like?
And then another revival was your Hit Parade, you mentioned.
Yep.
Was that, did you play on that show live, or was that, what were your contributions?
That was all recorded. I did the whole show, and it was the top 10 songs of the current week. And the extra songs we played were the top 2 songs of 20 years ago or 30 years ago or whatever, a difference in songs. However, that show couldn't really last because what's a hit this week doesn't make it next week. The kids are more fickle. There's no song like Night and Day that's going to last forever, or Stardust or any of those songs. There are no big standards that are coming out, or so it was more costly because it needed 10 new arrangements every week. You couldn't say the song was number 10 last week, it climbed up to number 8 this week, it's number 6 the following week. That was somehow just didn't work on the revival of the Hit Parade because of the kind of music that's being played now.
How do you think Chuck Barris did as a producer?
I think he was just great. He was just remarkable, and he used to do run-throughs of the shows for whoever was the host to try to make the shows better. Or, in the case of the Newlywed Game, to make them, raunchier, because he just had that native intelligence. He knew what was going to work on the air.
In '76, the Gong Show debuted. How
Yep.
did that show on the air? How close was it to the original concept of what Chuck Barris wanted to do?
It was the same. We did the pilot in San Francisco, and we went on with the same show. And it stayed pretty much the same for a lot of years.
Now, comedy was obviously a huge element of that show.
Right.
From the panelists to the performers. Were there any really truly talented acts who were on the Gong Show?
No act actually became a star different from American Idol. No act did become a star. The people who became stars, strangely enough, were stagehands like Gene the Dancing Machine, or the unknown comic who was a writer and figured out an act to do for himself, and of course Chuck, who was a big hit. But nobody really. There was no stardom, no burst.
I think like J.P. Morgan got a kind of a new boost to her career.
Yes. Well, it helped everybody. I'm sure it helped Artie Johnson and Jamie Farr, and we were all one pretty happy, pretty good family.
What kind of outrageous acts were on that show, do you remember?
Well, Lord, there was one act that got to me. Unbelievable how a fellow should figure out an act like this. He made faces, and he had photographs of himself, making a face like that. Then he would turn around to the camera. Now, that was his whole act. Could you imagine that being a guy's act? I think he got gonged about the fourth face he made, And afterwards, I remember saying to him, geez, you've got a terrific act, And he said, oh, that's not what I do for a living. I said, no, what do you? He said, I'm an accountant. Now, let me tell you something. I was telling Jennifer, anybody in the world could be on the Gong Show. We had every hooker that was on Hollywood Boulevard come in and play the trumpet, sing a song, do something, because I think that the scale for the show, which was a few $100s, was better than what they could make plying their trade on Vine Street,
Now, you appeared on the show, right? You were
yes.
You had some
whatever Chuck thought of, I was either a Roman statesman or just little bits and pieces.
So were you conducting a small combo or a band on the show?
I had 4 horns and 4 rhythm. So it was fairly small, and it's more flexible, really. If you're dealing with 8 guys, it's faster if you have to change an act, or from dress rehearsal if you have to change something. Easier to write for 8 men than for 28 men. Just faster,
And what was your band referred as, the name?
The Band with a Thug.
Milton Delugg
and the Band with a Thug.
Kind of
that
take
was
off
it.
on like Les Brown and the Band of Renown, kind of.
I think the Band of Renown was a better name than the Band with a Thug. But I do want to tell you, the most enjoyable times of my life were those 5 or 6 years with Chuck, because he just was always so pleased by what we did, and that makes you feel good. You start out feeling good. The boss likes what you're doing. And also, there was always a left turn that Chuck was making in all of his shows. None of them were straight ahead quiz shows or straight ahead any kind of shows. They were just wonderful, and he was wonderful.
He seemed big on spoofing and tongue-in-cheek kind of approach to things. I said he seemed like he was very big on parody and spoofing things on that show.
Oh yeah.
Now, tell me about your characters. You appeared as Nasso Literatus.
Yeah, I don't even remember. It's whatever Chuck thought of, and he'd explain to me what to do. I'd do my bit and get back to the band,
And Old Drool, does that ring a bell?
Yeah, I was Old Drool. I tell you something, our trombone player he usually had him wearing diapers sitting on a half moon. You know, after whatever funny stuff went on, they'd pull a cord and up he'd go.
What do the critics think of Gong Show?
Oh, I think that they mostly wrapped it, you know, but because it was so out of whack, but it was so good and so funny that it was in the top 10 all the time, you know, due to Chuck.
Did anyone famous ever come on the show and do something that was totally
Yes.
kind of off the wall?
When we did, we used to do like 2 specials a year, 2 Gong Show specials. And Chuck would have somebody on like, we were dickering with Bing Crosby, who said, sure, he'd do the show. He would sit in a chair and sing Old Rocking Chair's Got Me. And those kind of acts that were on the Gong Show, Chuck would usually, it's like he thought very little of them. He didn't realize who they were. That was a whole setup. And he'd pull the curtain on them. And it was funny.
Were there censorship issues?
Were the
Censorship? Was there?
Yes, there was. There was always a fight. Chuck would always put some act on that he knew wasn't going to get by NBC or ABC, because we were on both networks, 5 days and 2 nights. And Chuck would fight very hard for this act that he knew was going to lose. I keep thinking about the nuns. We had the singing nuns, and this was very irreligious. I don't know what the word is,
Sacrilege.
but they had beads. And we were playing the Charleston, and they were swinging the beads around. Now, you know that's not going to get on the air. And I knew it, and Chuck knew it. But he would fight for it like it was, you know, he down to the wire. He was fighting to get whatever raunchy acts that he had picked were going to get on.
What do you think?
Just to have a little tumult going, you know.
Do you think the boundaries of good taste were crossed a lot? On
Oh,
the show?
sure. But it was on purpose, you know. You see, if he fought hard enough for an act that wasn't going to get on at all, they would usually let some other act that shouldn't have been on get on, you know. What happened, the Lollipop Twins. We had 2 young ladies with lollipops. And I played, I'm in the mood for love, you know.
All right.
Now you know that act's not going to get on at all. However, the censors must have gone to lunch during that rehearsal or something, because the act got on. And the next day, Chuck got a call from the president of NBC. You know, what are you trying to do to the network? But things like that only made the whole show more joyful for us and the band, and everybody loved them, you know.
Okay. We're going to change.